Hello, Tungsten Miner here, continuing the series on Create. This time we're going to be looking at some more stationary machines, specifically those ones that have to do with fabrication. And there's a bunch of them, so let's jump right in. Okay, first up, we are going to take a look a little bit more at conveyor belts and how you move items around. A lot of these item processing machines, of course, require you to get items to and from them, so this is pretty important. This setup, I've got a chest here in the center, I've got an andesite funnel on one side, and I've got a brass funnel on the other side. Now, the difference between the two is that the andesite funnel takes one item at a time, and it always grabs the first item in the first slot and removes it, and then it goes on to the next, then the next, then the next, until it runs out of inventory. So, whatever's first is what you're going to get, and there's really not any way to control what you get. However, if you need that kind of control, you make yourself a brass funnel instead. And first of all, it always grabs the first item in the slot which matches this filter. And you can see I've right-clicked on this with a block of Veridium, and I've used my scroll wheel to scroll up and down until I got to 4. So now each stack that comes out of this chest has 4 Veridium blocks in it, and you can see that here. That these are slightly overlapping, and then here you can see it goes up by 1, and then it goes down by 4, and up by 1, and down by 4. So that's it pulling things out and getting some back again. So I've now got my carriages kind of heading off in opposite directions, and as we look around the back here, we can see that the 2 conveyor belts, one leads to the next, and then they both lead to this center one. And you can see they kind of take turns as to which one gets to put an item on the belt, but only one stack at a time can be on any given piece of belt. So over here, everything stops up when there's no more room for things to go, and it just kind of waits. And so you can see that belt there at the funnel itself is blocking anything else coming out of the chest. So one stack at a time. Now I'm extracting 4 at a time, so a stack counts as 4 on this side. But on this side, it won't coalesce the stacks. You only ever get 1 item out of an andesite funnel. And so these stacks are only 1 item each. So another reason to use a brass funnel is if you need more density on your belt system, you can achieve that with a brass funnel, whereas you cannot with an andesite funnel. In any case, they take turns, and then they go through and they get stuffed back into the chest. Apart from that, I've got a bunch of creative motors, and I use some brass casings on this side and some andesite casings on this side. Remember, casings are just purely decorative, nothing useful going on there. So that's a little bit about using funnels, which will be necessary as you start getting more complicated into creating things. Next up, I want to introduce this mechanical arm. What it does is it will reach out to blocks that I have marked as being sources, and it can have many sources, and it will place blocks onto targets, and it can also have many targets. In this particular example, I've got one source, which is just this depot over here, and then this block is a weighted ejector, and any block you place on it will get thrown to a target block, and then you can also choose which is your target block. And I had done so before I put this block down. So basically what's going on is this is a do-nothing machine where it just keeps tossing this block back and forth and back and forth. Now, I talk about choosing targets and all. Let's get into that in a little more detail because it's definitely worth seeing that done live. So let me clear out my inventory. And I'm going to grab all the things in this chest, which are all of the things you need to make this setup. So let me try and recreate what I have. First, I want a depot in this corner, and I want a stone block, one back from the depot, so over there. I'm going to need a motor facing up, and I'm going to need a cogwheel facing up. Okay, and I'm going to need a motor that is right here. And I'm going to need, okay, now I'm down to my weighted ejector and things. All right, so weighted ejector. The way this guy works is you have it in your hand, and if you just place it on the ground, it's going to drop things onto whatever's the adjacent block. And let me get a wrench. Just holding a wrench, you can see the target that it's going to shoot towards, which is right next to itself. But that's not what we want. So what we have to do is right-click on the block we want it to be the target. Shift right-click, sorry. So shift right-click on the target block, and then as you aim at where your thing is going to go, it shows you a green box where your weighted ejector is going to land, and it shows you the sparkles of where you're going to go. Now, if you try to put this in a location which it can't go to, it will give you this red box instead. So as you can see, you can't go around corners. You can only put it down at 90-degree angles. So this is okay, but this is not. This is okay, but this is not. So I'm going to drop that down here. My engine is turned around the wrong way. Put that down again. So the engine power in this case is winding up a spring, which is going to get released as soon as this detects a pressure on top of itself. So now finally the mechanical arm. This works pretty much the same way. When you've got it in your hand, you can right-click on a block that you want to be the source, and if you right-click again, it turns it into a target. So right-click again, turn it into a source. Over here, this is my target, so I'll click twice. And then when I place this block, the mechanical arm now has all its inputs all set up. And I can look at it with a wrench, and it shows me inputs and outputs. I can double-check what's going on. If I get close enough, you can see when multiple outputs are available round robin. So if I had chosen many places to put things, it would just go one and then the next and then the next without any regard to anything. If I scroll my mouse wheel a bit here, it's a little fiddly. Come on, there we go. Forced round robin means it's going to go one to the next, to the next, to the next. But if one of them is not available, like the belts we saw before that were all backed up, it will just wait until the next place becomes available. So it definitely will evenly distribute things, and it will wait if it has to in order to make that happen. And then finally, multiple targets prefer first target. It will go to the first target until it's full, and then it will go to the second target until it's full, and then so on. So you have a couple of different behaviors you can choose, but that's it. Those are the three. So now we've got our full setup here, and all I need to do is place a bit of diorite here. Our arm will notice that there's now something it can pick up on a source, and it will move it along and drop it on the target. And that's going to fling it back over again, and we'll just repeat the process. So this thing is going to move at a speed which is directly related to how fast this input motor is running. So if I wanted my arm to go faster, I could give it a faster spin, and the arm would go faster. Okay, next up, how about using an arm to actually make some things? So over here, we have some mechanical crafters. They have some brass funnels connected to them. And you can see I've right-clicked on them with a wrench to turn them around so that they're inputs rather than outputs. And you can see that arrow is kind of pointing inwards towards the mechanical crafter. And then for filters, I have given them each a filter of a chunk of iron, and a chunk of iron, and a stick. So this should make a sword. The three of these on top of each other form, basically, you can think of like the center column of a crafting table. And I provide it with some power. The power gets communicated up and down the whole stack, or however many you've got. So you just need to provide power to one place. And this whole thing will then take any ingredients and combine them to make whatever that recipe turns out to make. Over here, I've just got some depots with some raw ingredients laying out. And here, I've got a redstone lamp with a lever that is turned on. See, the lamp is turned on, which blocks the arm from doing anything. So if at any point you need to be able to say, wait, I'm not ready yet, or not all the ingredients are ready, or whatever, I don't want the arm to do anything, all you need to do is provide a redstone signal, and it will keep the arm from acting. But here we are, we're ready. Let's turn this thing on. And so now it's going to go grab the iron ingot, and it's going to find a place to stuff it into. And over here, we can see that iron ingot is now in here. Now I've got the engine set to a pretty slow speed, so the arm is not really particularly whizzing around at all, but it's stuffing in the contents one at a time, and when it finally finds that stick, It throws it in here, and I have set these up so that these little belts in between, and just clicking them with a wrench turns the belts in different directions. So I've set all the belts to aim down at this one block, and then the belt coming out of this one aims at this depot. So items in the top block follow the arrows to the middle block, which follow the arrows to the bottom block, which follow the arrows out to where I've got a place for that thing to go. So that's using a very simple kind of setup to automatically craft items using a crafting grid. Okay, as with our prior example, this one's worth looking at and building it together. So I've put together the materials back here to be able to do that. So let me clear out my inventory, grab a bunch of stuff here. Okay, so first thing we're going to need, what is the first thing we're going to need? We're going to need some depots. Depot. Oh, looks like I forgot to put in some depots. So we got 1, 2, and 3 depots. We've got a lamp in the middle. We've got some of those mechanical crafters. Let's aim them this way. Oops. See? Stuck it right in there. Okay, so now we've got 3 of those. We're going to need some power for these various things. So we want one facing straight up with a cog. We want another cog over here with the motor. And we're now going to want to take our ingredients and get those ready. Well, maybe we'll do that later. Next, we need to put on our brass funnels. 1, 2, and 3. And you notice they're all facing outwards. If I had wanted to do this in a smarter way, I can shift and right click. And you notice they start facing inwards. So you don't have to hit them with a wrench if you're wise about it and you remember up front. Now I'm going to put in iron, and stick. And I'm going to, using an open hand here. Oh, that's right. So these guys, come on. Already know. Yeah. That there's only one allowed. So that's fine. I don't have to do anything special now. So we're going to put our arm. That's a source, that's a source, that's a source. This is a target. And you notice, since this is going in, it can't be a source. It doesn't allow things to come out because it's an inward-facing funnel. So it automatically recognizes it must be a target. And then we're going to drop this guy right here. And we're going to throw a lever on there and turn him on. Now, this thing probably noticed the redstone pulse of my flipping the switch here. So it's probably going to just start grabbing things right away the first time round. But it would only do that once. Okay, I guess not, since the materials weren't there already. It missed the pulse. And now we can just flip that off, and we'll see a repeat performance of building a sword, except I forgot the depot. So we'll toss that here. While it's doing that, I'll grab my wrench, and I'll turn that around so that the output goes that way. And it has one more ingredient. And now we get a sword. Very good. Okay, onwards. But we don't have to be limited to just an ordinary crafting grid. Here I've got a monster big setup. This is the setup you need in order to make a grinding wheel or crushing wheel. So if we look at the recipe for this thing, you can see it requires basically a 5x5 crafting grid, which of course does not normally exist. And the only way to get one in the game is to build one yourself using these mechanical crafting blocks. And so what I've done here is I've set up a big grid of mechanical crafting blocks. I've used my wrench to turn them all so that they face inwards and downwards, and then finally across. This thing here is a cover. Pretty simple to make, but the whole point of it is to block one of these so it doesn't get considered as being part of the recipe. That way, when all of these things are full, except that one, it considers the recipe to be complete, and it now attempts to make the recipe. Whereas if I hadn't covered this one, it would be waiting around and waiting around and waiting around for that last ingredient to show up, which of course it never would, and therefore this thing wouldn't actually work. So it's important to use covers if you're going to add extra elements, or if you're going to have a grid that you sometimes use for big things and sometimes for little things. In this case, I wanted to just make it a little bit easier to get the item out. And so I threw in an extra one of these blocks just to make it easy to get the thing out the side. So you can see here I've got this spinning at a bit faster of a speed because you could see before it takes a while to coalesce the items if it's moving slowly. I've also got this thing moving at a really fast speed because boy, oh boy, would that take a long time to fill all this out. And then I've also set up all of these brass funnels. And again, I had to right click on these to turn them around so that they are setting inputs in. If you don't do this, what will happen when you take your mechanical arm and try and tap them is it just won't work. It won't accept that as a target. So in here, I've got andesite alloy, I've got oak planks, and I've got a piece of stone, which corresponds to exactly the ingredients we need over here. And now let's turn this thing on, see what it does. So you can see it's moving quite a bit faster, and what it's doing is it's grabbing a whole stack at a time and placing each one where it belongs. So now it's going to grab the whole stack of andesite alloy at once and go around the circle and place the andesite alloy in the slots as it finds an opening to put them in. And since the speed is pretty fast, it's moving right along at doing this. Still not exactly speedy, but hey, it's automated, so it doesn't matter. And as it fills out these last couple, it's going to finally notice, hey, this whole recipe is done. Locks it into place, starts sliding all the items inwards and then downwards, and now it's going to slide them towards each other. And finally, to the last block, putting it all together and making a pair of crushing wheels. So, as it turns out, that's the only recipe for crushing wheels in the game, but this is not the only way to make them. Really all you need are these mechanical crafters. You can place items in these manually just by right-clicking on them with whatever the item is that goes in there, and when the mechanical crafter as a whole notices that it's got everything it needs, then it will just put it all together, no big deal. So you don't have to use the funnels and the arm and the whole complicated thing. But it is kind of cool to be able to do it that way. Next up, let's talk about sequential assembly. So you will sometimes see instructions like this, sequenced assembly, where it says you got to poke it with deployers a couple of times with different materials, and what is this all about? And what if you didn't do all three steps? What do you get then? And so kind of a confusing thing. So let's watch this thing in action and then kind of come back and talk through this. So for this particular recipe, I've got, I don't want that, I want this. I start off with a gold sheet. So I've got myself a gold sheet, and I'm going to take my gold sheet and throw it in this chest. We've got a funnel that's pulling it out of the chest, and it's going to go underneath one where it gets poked with a small cog, and then a large cog, and then an iron ingot. And you can see it's an incomplete precision mechanism object. Gets tossed onto that, which kicks it over to this guy, goes back into the chest, comes around again. Because in the recipe you can see this around 5 times, repeat sequence 5 times. So it's going to have to go through this whole rigmarole 5 times before it's a complete precision part. And each time it's pulling from the inventory of this deployer. And you can see it has 54 cogwheels remaining, 53 here, 56 there. And if I need to introduce more, I can just dump them in the chests, and these chutes will pull inventory out of the chests and add them to the deployer. I think the deployer has a capacity of 1 stack, so that's what I gave it to start with, and the chests will be empty at this point. And now it's done. So I used a brass tunnel, not funnel, but tunnel, which allows you to have this thing sitting on top of a belt, and it can make decisions about which way to send something. So it sends only completed precision mechanisms out this slot onto this depot, and it sends anything else out this side onto, well, this weighted ejector. So when we look at the process as a whole, and now we'll go back and kind of look at some more detail here. I want a gold sheet, so I will grab one of those. What's going to happen is we've got a large chest. I drop the sheet in here. This funnel is just going to extract the first thing that it can, travels along the belt. This deployer has no idea what's underneath it. It just knows I deploy things, so I'm going to poke it with whatever my inventory happens to be. In this case, the inventory happens to be a small cog, because that's what I've dropped into here. As the item goes underneath each of these, it just gets poked with the next thing. Now, since I'm doing this in a specific order, that is the order of the recipe, this thing continues to build up towards being a complete precision mechanism. Now, if I ejected this thing from the process before it was done, I'd have just an incomplete precision mechanism item, which is basically of no use to anybody. I could throw it back in to the system at any time, and so long as it eventually gets through and gets all of the parts that it needs, it will ultimately turn into a precision mechanism. Maybe. And that's kind of the rub here, is I've been lucky so far, and I haven't ever had one go bad on me. But if we look at the recipe, and we can see there's a 20% chance that it doesn't work, and it's just random salvage. So basically you just get junk at the end, which would be kind of unfortunate. So, you know, lucky again, I got another one. But if you try this often enough, you're going to wind up with maybe some gold nuggets, maybe, you know, a bit of a gold sheet, maybe a few gears, right? You're just going to get random bits of stuff instead of getting the part that you were expecting at the end. So it's just the way it goes. Not much you can do about it. So that is the sequenced assembly mechanism, or mechanic in this game. There are a number of things you can make this way. One of them is to make cogwheels. So you've got a decent chance of getting a lot of cogwheels for basically 4 buttons and an andesite alloy. And if you look at the recipe for cogwheels in general, you got 8 buttons and andesite alloy to make 8 cogwheels, so you can do a fair bit better, both in conserving your parts and having a lot more cogwheels that you wind up with at the end for cheaper, but with the chance that it may not work out. Here's the precision mechanism we just made, and then finally, to make the large cogwheel, you can do the same thing. And again, the recipe's a little bit cheaper, gives you a little bit more stuff. So once you've got one of these setups kind of working, yeah, it's sort of worth it. It can be worth its bother to set the thing up. Last up, we have this mechanical saw. And you might say to yourself, this looks an awful lot like the stone cutting table from vanilla Minecraft. And in fact, it works almost exactly the same, except it's a mechanized version. And what you can do is, instead of having a GUI where you pick the particular block you want, you just take an example of the block you want and drop it in this filter, and it will, among all of the choices, if the item has that as one of its choices, make that selection for you automatically and spit out that item. So another nice thing about these funnels is they can be blocked by redstone. So you see this little red band here. That's because I've got this lever right here. If I flip that lever, the light goes out and it starts releasing items. Cutting can take a little while, so things will back up, but that's all right. And it will work its way steadily through making bricks for me. And that's the last bit for this video. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the video, hit the like button down below, and subscribe for more mod spotlights.